What's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over everything you need to know when starting a new game in Grounded. This will apply to brand new players starting a game for the first time, as well as returning players that are looking for a fresh start. These tips will get you through the beginning of the game with relative ease and efficiency and will be relevant for all levels of difficulties. There won't be any major spoilers as I'm only covering the first few missions and will only be talking about what's necessary for progression within them. Apart from that, I'll be going over all of the other things you need to know in between the missions to get you started off on the right foot. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. My name is Park Attack. Let's get going. The very first thing that most of us will do in a survival game like Grounded is start snatching up everything we can get our filthy little hands on, whether we know if it's actually useful or not. Well, I've got good news for you, buddy. You've already figured out most of the game. All jokes aside, in Grounded, hoarding things is very rarely a bad thing, so feel no shame in doing so. However, there are a couple things that you'll want an abundance of at the very beginning of the game. Plant fiber is one of them and can be found almost anywhere, and for a good reason. You'll need it for crafting bandages, which will be used constantly in the beginning of the game, since you're no good at blocking yet, and you're literally wearing leaves for armor. Plant fiber is also used to make crude rope, which is used for lots of tier 1 gear, as well as building structures and useful things for your house. Later on, you'll become more efficient at making both bandages and crude rope, but for now, they require 3 plant fibers apiece, so make sure to keep a healthy stock on hand. Bandages don't only require plant fiber, but the recipe also calls for sap. This is the second thing you'll want to stockpile, but it's not quite as common as plant fiber. Sap can be found on sticks throughout the yard, such as the one leaning up against the baseball, but can be found in larger amounts on the fallen branch nearby, as well as around the base of the oak tree. Not only is sap used in bandages, it's also used for torches, and since both are items that you'll use throughout most of the game, you can never have too much sap. One of the first structures you'll come across in the yard is a field station. There are many of these scattered throughout the yard, so don't be an idiot like me and start building a massive base around it in order to protect it like some kind of paranoid mother hen. Later on, we'll talk about good locations for your main base, but in the meantime, just set up a small camp outside the field station by building a lean-to, a roasting pit, a workbench, and even a storage basket if you're feeling frisky. Field stations are great places to build close to as they provide utilities that aren't found anywhere else and also act as respawn points. That being said, there are plenty of fish in the sea, so don't settle down with the first one you come across, no matter how tantalizing it may seem. Most field stations will have some things you pick up inside as well, such as audio logs or written files pertaining to the story, as well as granola bars. These granola bars are actually pretty special, as they instantly heal for a decent amount, they never expire, and they're one of the few resources in the game that are finite, meaning they do not respawn. Because of this, I highly recommend that you save them for later as a way to quickly heal yourself during tough fights. Besides these items, all field stations also have 3 utilities you can use, but at the moment, the only one actually available to you is the resource analyzer. When you gather a new item, you'll notice a little exclamation mark in the corner of the items icon in your inventory. This indicates that the item can be analyzed, which will reveal any unknown recipes tied to that particular item, and will also grant brain power, which will eventually level you up and unlock additional recipes. The resource analyzer has 3 charges that are on a cooldown of 1 in-game hour, which, I'm being told, is about 2 minutes IRL. I haven't actually timed it out myself because I'm lazy. But the point is that the cooldown isn't that long, but is long enough that you're probably not going to want to sit around waiting for it to complete. In the beginning of the game, everything will be new and analyzable? I don't know. Just make sure you're using your 3 charges early and often. Alright, the next thing to address is armor. While there might be better tier 1 armor sets in the game, crafting a full set of clover armor is something you should do as soon as possible for a few reasons. Reason number 1, it's extremely easy to craft. Once you have your workbench, the only things you'll need are 13 clover leaves, 6 crude rope, and 2 sprigs, all of which are easy to come up with. Number 2, it has a ridiculously cheap repair cost. Repairing each piece of clover armor only costs 2 clover leaves, which are easy to find throughout the yard. And number 3, The armor piece and set bonuses reduced hunger and thirst drain, which means you can spend less time eating and drinking and more time trying to get through this part of the game. Although you won't be using Clover armor for long, at the moment it's easily the most convenient set to use, and that's all that really matters right now. Having said that, Red Ant armor is probably the most useful tier 1 armor set, as its bonuses are useful throughout most of the game. Each piece will allow you to haul one extra plank of grass or weed stem, and the set bonus for wearing all 3 will trick red ants into thinking you're a friend, so you can walk into their nearby anthill and steal everything that's not nailed down to the floor. If you want to take the time to farm this out, it's not the worst idea in the world, but you'll need to kill lots of red ants for the materials needed to craft and repair the armor, which might be easier to do a little later in the game. Okay, now let's talk about weapons. There are 4 base weapon types in the game, being stabbing, slashing, busting, and chopping. Certain enemies will be resistant or weak to certain weapon types, which can make a big difference in combat, especially in the early parts of the game. To find out an enemy's weaknesses and resistances, you can scan them with your peeper, which is available to you right from the start, so don't forget to scan new insects you might come across. Most two-handed weapons are, for whatever reason, not labeled as any of the 4 main weapon types, and are instead considered generic, which effectively makes them as effective or ineffective against all enemies unless specifically mentioned. One of the most important things to know about weapons that the game doesn't tell you is that there are weapon-specific mutations to unlock for each weapon type. If you don't know what mutations are, you can check them out in the now appropriately named Mutations tab. Mutations are passive buffs that are unlocked by reaching certain milestones. Some of them will enhance certain aspects of combat, and some will just make things generally more convenient. There are tons of mutations, and when fully upgraded you can have 5 active at the same time. But for now, let's just focus on the weapon-specific ones. To unlock the first tier of any of these, you'll need to get 40 final blows with that specific weapon, such as daggers, swords, or axes. The final blows must be against enemies that'll fight back, so committing genocide against weevils will yield no progress, no matter how bad you might want it to. The easiest targets for this are lawn mites, which only take a few hits to kill, deal very little damage to you, and can be found in rather large numbers near the fallen oak branch. Red worker ants are also pretty easy to kill, and even though they're naturally passive, they do count towards mutation progression because they'll actually fight back, unlike those little weevils. I'm not going to go through all the different weapon-specific mutations right now, but you can easily look up what each one does on the wiki page from the link in the description below. I will, however, let you know my 2 current favorite and what they do. The first one is Assassin, which is unlocked by getting 40 kills with a dagger. This mutation adds a bleed effect to your dagger attacks, causing enemies to take damage over time in addition to the flat weapon damage. I like this because it makes fighting dangerous enemies a little easier, as you're able to let the bleed do most of the damage while you kite the enemy or use your shield to block. My second favorite is Chopper, which causes your axe attacks to apply a debuff to the enemy that weakens their defense, causing them to take more damage. If you can't tell, I'm a big fan of the offensive weapon buffs because I rely mostly on my shield and parrying for defense. But to each their own, so go ahead and start farming final blows with whatever weapon you want to main from the get-go. Most of the early game weapons you can craft with basic materials that can be found on the ground. But to make a tier 1 bow, you're going to need to get your hands on some gnat fuzz. Gnats can be found flying around bodies of water, but they can be difficult to kill without a bow. The best solution to this problem is to make your way to the oak tree at night and climb up to the light where there are more than enough gnats to slaughter, as they all buzz around the light for no apparent reason. Keep your head on a swivel though, as there are wolf spiders that roam around the oak tree at night that will f you up if you so much as look at them. Once you've crafted your bow, you won't need any more gnat fuzz to repair it. But either way, gnats will just be easier to kill now in general, now that you have a ranged weapon. Now at this early stage in the game, it's likely that you haven't come across any brittle quartzite or marble shards yet, but you soon will, and there are a few important things to know about them right from the start. If you're unfamiliar with them, basically they're the resource used to upgrade your weapons and armor, and similar to granola bars, they're one of the only finite resources in the game. Though even though almost everything else in the game will respawn, quartzite and marble will not. Even though this is the case, you shouldn't feel the need to hold on to them out of fear that you'll spend it on gear that you won't be using for long. There are a ton of nodes to find naturally, and even if you were to use them all up, eventually you'll be able to craft them. This means that you shouldn't be afraid of depleting your only resources for upgrading gear, but it also means that for the time being, you might want to plan out what you spend it on, so that you're not left empty-handed until you unlock the crafting recipe. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that upgrading a piece of gear will also fully repair it. So if you're already planning on upgrading something, such as your favorite weapon, it might make sense to do so slowly, one step at a time as the item requires repairs. The only tier 1 armor I would really suggest upgrading is the Red Ant armor set. This is because of the previously stated fact that you can use it later in the game when building and infiltrating the Red Ant Hill, whereas all the other tier 1 armor sets will most likely never be used again. Now that we've covered some of the most essential basics to know at the start of the game, let's get into the main quest progression. The first few missions are pretty quick, pretty straightforward, and basically serve as the game's tutorial. Once you investigate the mysterious machine and press the button on top, you'll have to figure out how to fix 2 of the lasers. First one is cleared by chopping down the blade of grass that's blocking it, and the second one requires killing all the mites that are chewing on the cable. Once you've completed this, you'll be sent to find the Oak Lab, which is located at the bottom of the oak tree in the middle of the yard. I suggest heading straight north towards the tree, because if you deviate too far to the east or west, you'll hit a wall with lots of spiders. On your way around the tree, gather as many acorns and sap as you can to stuff into your backpack. Quickly craft a shovel with said acorns and start digging up grubs. Grub hides are used to make canteens, which will come in extremely handy for the rest of your tiny life, as it'll allow you to carry around water with you. Once you make it to the north side of the tree, you'll notice some purple smoke, which indicates the entrance to the Oak Lab. After perusing around inside, you'll find Burgle, who'll have a lot to say, but will eventually unlock the ASL terminal for you that can be accessed at all field stations. There are 3 things the ASL terminal is used for. The first being the science shop, which is where you can spend raw science to unlock crafting recipes and other various things. Second is the Burgle quests. These are basically simple side quests you can complete at your leisure that reward you with raw science. There isn't a cost associated with these quests, so make sure you've always got 3 active and pick up a new one whenever you've completed another. The final thing you can do at the ASL terminal is spend your milk molars. This isn't revealed to you right away, but as soon as you collect your first milk molar, this menu will show up on all terminals. Milk molars require a tier 2 hammer to break, so don't worry about collecting them at this point in time. But if you happen to come across one, it's not a bad idea to mark it on the map with a trail marker, or simply just remember where it was so you can come back later and get it. Milk molars are used to upgrade stats such as max health and stamina, hunger and thirst drain, and most importantly, your maximum number of active mutations. When you get around to it, I highly recommend spending them on increasing your max active mutations first, as this has the greatest effect on gameplay overall. What you can do right now is spend some of that raw science you've been accumulating at the science shop. And the first thing you might want to get are the recipes from the multi-story bases purchase. This will allow you to craft floors and other structures essential for your home base. Now that you've got the recipes to craft a structure worthy of calling home, it's time to choose a location. Luckily for you, building anywhere near the oak tree is actually an extremely convenient place to do so, as there are plenty of useful resources nearby, and it's located pretty much right exactly in the middle of the yard. But of course, you can really choose anywhere to call home. You could also make a bunch of bases throughout the yard if you want to, or you can even just not build a base at all and play as a wandering nomad. These are all 100% viable and up to you, and at the end of the day, any decision made in-game can be changed, so don't be afraid to try something new. Now, whether or not you've built a base, the next natural step is to take on the Hedge Lab. Before doing this, you'll most likely want to do a little prep work, as this mission takes a lot longer than anything we've done up to this point. First thing you'll want to bring is bandages. There are plenty of plant fibers and sap nearby, so stock up on bandages before you head out. Another thing you'll probably want is a full canteen. Having to stop in the middle of a quest and go looking for water is not a good time, so make sure to fill your trusty canteen. Another important thing to bring are materials needed to repair your gear on the go. If you decide to follow my suggestions and are sticking with clover armor, you might begin to see why it's so convenient here. Clover armor only takes 2 clover leaves to repair each piece, so obtaining and carrying them are much easier than any of the other tier 1 armors. As far as weapons go, I also suggest just sticking with any of the pebblet variety, as pebblets are the only thing needed to repair them, but once again, you do you. There are a lot of jumping puzzles on the way to the Hedge Lab, so the final thing you'll want is a fresh dandelion tuft. All of this happens pretty high up, relatively speaking, so bringing a tuft along can be a literal lifesaver if you're anything like me and can't jump for shit. Even if you are a good jumper, it helps to navigate the hedge more easily by being able to land higher jumps without taking fall damage. Now, some of the more astute viewers might have noticed I didn't say anything about bringing food. The reason for this is that I always find it easiest to build a roasting pit at the location where I'm headed and hunt and cook food as needed. On lower difficulties, food doesn't decay as fast, so you can probably get away with carrying around raw food and roast for a while. But on Woe, the game's highest difficulty, this is not the case. I'd suggest bringing along the materials to make both a roasting pit and a lean-to so that you can set up shop at the nearby field station, or even right outside the Hedge Lab entrance to set your respawn point even closer. Speaking of which, once you've crossed all your T's and dotted your I's and you're finally ready to start the mission, make sure you head towards the west side of the hedge, as that's where you'll find the field station as well as the ascent point to get up in that bitch. On your way through the hedge, you'll come across lots and lots of spiderlings, webs, and web sacks. This is a great place to farm web fiber, as all three of these will drop it. Web sacks also have a chance to drop other bug parts, such as stink bug, bombardier, and ladybug parts, but will in turn spawn a few spiderlings, so beware. I tend to break all of the web sacks that are on flat surfaces or open areas, and ignore the rest, as fighting the spiderlings is much more manageable in these areas. Web fibers can be turned into silk rope, which is used to craft several pieces of tier 2 gear, but more importantly, used for zip lines, which will soon become your main form of transportation throughout the yard. Basically, you'll always have need of web fibers, so it doesn't hurt to gather as much as you can while you're here. When you're about halfway through the hedge, you might notice a door to your left when taking one of the zip lines. Inside is a switch to turn on the resource surveyors at every field station, which will allow you to track analyzed resources on your map. It's not really that hard to find, but if you aren't looking for it, you can easily pass it up, so make sure to keep an eye out for it. Although the Hedge Lab mission is a little lengthy and has its own challenges, combat isn't really one of them, as there isn't a big boss fight and the enemies present are relatively easy to handle. Most of the times you'll be fighting spiderlings, but eventually you'll come across a couple Orb Weaver Juniors. These guys have the same weaknesses and resistances as the spiderlings, and are only resistant to stabbing, which basically means they'll be hard to kill with arrows, but everything else should be okay. The other enemies you'll come across are Rusties and Tasties. These slow-moving robotic enemies are similar, but not entirely the same. Rusties have no weaknesses or resistances, aside from being hit from behind, so any weapon will do. Tasties, on the other hand, are resistant to everything except busting weapons, so using a hammer will make your life easier. Since they're both slow and they only attack from melee range, my favorite way to deal with them is to throw the hammer, as it keeps you out of their attack range and deals a considerate amount of damage and stun. Just make sure you don't miss and throw your hammer out the window, and they'll be pretty easy to handle. After navigating the lab and retrieving the super chip, it's time to head back to the Oak Lab. Once you're there, talk to Burgle, give him the chip, and get ready to actually play the game.